The typical suffrage narrative really begins in 1848 for many people, historians included, and that begins with the Seneca Falls Convention in upstate New York. And, the trajectory kind of follows that, women fight for these rights, that they are eventually gained not until the 20th century. We've made a point to kind of push this trajectory of the suffrage narrative back into the 18th century, to look at the early origins or the roots of women voting. And we're able to do that by exploring the little-known period under the New Jersey State Constitution from 1776 to 1807, in which women, and also free people of color, legally exercised the right to vote in New Jersey.
All of the states during the Revolutionary period were asked to write their own state constitutions. And for reasons that we still don't really understand, the New Jersey legislators wrote the terms of the suffrage provisions in a gender-neutral way so that if inhabitants owned a certain amount of property, a certain amount of proclamation money, it was called, then they were allowed to vote. Now, what was really unusual about New Jersey is that we know from newspapers that at least beginning in the 1790s, but possibly earlier, women actually did vote. We had very little direct information about who the women were who were voting and where they voted. And so it was understood, but not very well understood.
We went on a search to find poll lists for that period of time. So far to date, we've identified 18 poll lists dated from 1797 to 1807, and 9 of those poll lists identify women voters on them, and those lists are dated from 1800 to 1807. So far, we've identified at least 163 women and at least 4 free African American voters as well.
So the fact that they may have been formerly enslaved, or the fact that they may have been free for a while, the fact that they were still African Americans and considered at the bottom rung of society, that still did not dissuade them from wanting to exercise their right.
The people that these African Americans were voting amongst, they were some of the pillars of society. So this was a big deal, I'm sure, for them to be able to vote amongst these people that have really been people that were their slave masters, some of them.
And so what the exhibit has done is remind us, as well as the public, that this is really significant, that out of this experience came a memory that once upon a time, the values of the American Revolution led in New Jersey to women having a political voice.
So we're a culture, for good or ill, we use our history. We have things called constitutional originalists. We constantly look back. And it's very easy to look back, especially if you've had a very conventional education, and just not see women there. But there are moments where we see it could have been different. When we see those women voting in New Jersey, it could have kept going in the same way it did for men.
Your findings tantalize us with the idea that the mind has no sex and the franchise has no sex for a pretty prolonged period of the working out of the revolutionary settlement. I think you've thrown open the whole question of women in public in the early United States, which we know was getting debate.
The ideas that we may think of as just day before yesterday were right there in 1776, that people knew that discrimination was unfair. They knew that slavery was wrong. They knew that racism was wrong. And women and men recognized that women's rights were not always available.
And it's very interesting to me to see how we've evolved as a country, and with the promises of freedom for all, that women would have been treated as equals to men then, and then things changed for women and for people of color.
The women who voted in New Jersey really, really matter. They didn't vote for very long, but the very fact that they did matters. It shows us that ordinary women, not just the elite that we always hear from, but ordinary women, black and white, when they were given the chance to vote, they did it, which just blows our mind as far as what we think of women in the Revolutionary period as being all about. They cared. They thought that they mattered, and when they were given just a small opportunity, they exercised that vote in ways that historians of previous eras just would not have believed.
There's so much that we still don't know, and so much about this period that is still worth exploring. You know, this isn't a brief moment at all. This is a 31-year period. This is a generation, if not two or possibly three, of women and free people of color that were able to vote in this period. And being able to not only discover, you know, the stories of the women, but to be able to find their names on these poll lists, to learn more about them, their lives and their experiences with this kind of first generation of women voters in the United States. Really pull these kind of stories out of the margins and give them the attention that they deserve.